Hello, and welcome to our webcast for October 18, 2019. Sorry, what made you laugh?
Because it hadn't lit up, so you were in the middle of saying something when it went online.
Sorry, okay.
C'est pas grave.
Okay, so my name is Christian Debré, and this is Amy Asbrook, the director of Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet. Okay? Hello, okay?
Bonjour.
Also joining us, Taylor Hyatt. Over there, oh, somewhere here, okay?
Somewhere in your tiny box.
Okay, also joining us, Taylor Hyatt, our policy analysis and outreach coordinator. Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet is a non-religious organization by and for people with disabilities and our allies. We believe that the choice to die is not free as long as old, ill, and disabled people don't have a free choice in where and how they live. And that must change. Today's topics. Excerpt. What's this word? Excerpt of the expert report, part 1, decision making, capacity, and
Suicidality.
Okay, NCD, which is
National Council on Disability.
Affirm opposition to assisted suicide. So AB has worked with us through those two subjects.
Okay. All right. Excerpts from the expert report. Part 1.
I have a lot of
I shouldn't have done that. But it sounded good. Part 1, decision-making capacity and suicidality. And this is especially important because if, as we are afraid, they decide not to appeal the Truchon decision, when Parliament goes in to modify the medical assistance in dying law, probably one of the things that is going to need to happen is to make the capacity assessment process stricter. And in the Truchon case, the judge didn't have this information to draw on. This was an expert report submitted for the Lamb case. And it became public because the plaintiff's attorney made it public when he requested to adjourn the trial. So basically, if this report had come into the Truchon case, it's possible
that the decision
the decision might have gone the other way, but probably not, because the judge really did seem to be going in a particular direction. But certainly this information is going to be important when Parliament looks at redoing the law in the next 6 months. So the expert report that led to the suspension of the Lamb case contained a lot of useful information that seemed worth sharing. This week, we're looking at that part of the report submitted by Dr. Madeline Lee that focuses on decision-making capacity in the context of assisted suicide and euthanasia. Dr. Lee is a cancer psychiatrist at the Princess Margaret Cancer Center in Toronto, as well as the developer and program lead of medical assistance in dying at the University Health Network, or UHN,
network
in Toronto.
It is a very, very large.
Yeah, it's 4 hospitals.
Yeah.
So she's a big player. And as we recall, the judge in the Truchon case said, only doctors who administer MAID can talk about this.
So
they're the only ones who know anything. So, yeah, she's won. So we'll hear what she has to say. Dr. Lee cares for people who request euthanasia, trains and supervises other MAID practitioners, develops assessment tools, and conducts research on the motivations and reactions of people who receive MAID or assisted suicide or euthanasia.
Only.
Right. And she researches the effects
Oh, sorry, I forgot what.
and she researches the effects of MAID on medical professionals.
So she do quite a lot of things. She's
She's an
major
overachiever.
player. Yeah.
She's an overachiever.
Yeah.
Okay, the first topic of Dr. Lee's report is decision-making capacity and consent to euthanasia. She says the Applebaum guidelines, and there's a link to another webcast where we talked more about those. The Applebaum guidelines for assessing capacity to make medical decisions, which focus on only the cognitive aspects of capacity, meaning understanding, appreciation, reasoning, and the ability to express a choice, leave out emotions such as hope, anger, sadness, anxiety, and the ability to experience pleasure, which also strongly influence treatment decisions.
Yeah.
I hope nobody confuses emotional reactions with arbitrary reactions. I've been anxious this week, but there's a cause. I've been worried about the sick cat I'm looking after. People don't lack hope or become angry for no reason. So capacity assessments in this case almost need to do two things: identify the emotion that the person is working through and address the cause without blaming it on their disability.
Right. But as we saw in the Truchon decision, the judge blamed their inability to live independently on their disability rather than the policy that forces people into institutions. Okay. Dr. Lee cites a study of euthanasia of people with psychiatric disabilities in the Netherlands that we reviewed in February of 2018, calling the capacity assessments reported there superficial. She believes that capacity evaluations for medical assistance in dying should include other factors, particularly when the person has a psychiatric condition. And some of those factors are comparing the person's values against the values of society, undue internal influence on voluntariness of the decision, such as from mental disorders or substance abuse, and the emotions and values motivating the request to die.
But will anyone check on societal views and values that are anti-disability and the emotions they can inspire? Or are they just going to leave everything as it is, and disabled people in distress might be taught to hate themselves?
Right, exactly. Because people don't see a problem, because everybody thinks that it's better to be dead than disabled. People don't see a problem when a disabled person feels that way. Dr. Lee notes that some psychiatric conditions, by their nature, can exert undue internal influence on the voluntariness of a patient's decision-making. The desire to die can be a symptom of depression, anxiety, or lack of pleasure in everyday activities can also affect decision-making. She adds that even doctors who specialize in mental illness often cannot tell the difference between suicidality and a so-called rational desire to end one's life, which we don't really believe there is such a thing, but there you go. She says there are currently no available capacity assessment tools that evaluate all of these factors and adequately protect vulnerable populations. I wish that the Judge Baudouin had seen that, because that would have been good, but she didn't, so we're stuck. The story of a woman with blood cancer and chronic depression illustrates this point. Though her depression was partly controlled with medication, as the cancer progressed, she refused both antidepressants and blood transfusions in favor of euthanasia. So she chooses euthanasia. The woman's psychiatrist and oncologist supported her decision, given the intolerable side effects of the cancer treatment. There was no discussion. Dr. Lee didn't mention any intervention for palliative care or minimizing the side effects. And she was assessed approved and went through the 10-day waiting period before deciding to go to the hospital for further treatment. So she changed her mind. She decided to go to the hospital for more treatment for her cancer.
Run change.
Once there, however, the woman opted to receive maid at home. 2 changes.
Second change.
The day before the procedure was scheduled, she changed her mind again.
Third one.
Changes. This time she wanted palliative care. After a medical crisis requiring a return to the hospital, she requested maid yet again. So she was home and she was going to get maid, but then she had a medical crisis and went back to the hospital. But then she decided she wanted maid again. And then 2 days before her death would have taken place, she agreed to restart blood transfusions and to try new cancer treatments. So she went back and forth 5-6 times. Her doctors did not consider her request to be withdrawn, nor did they have concerns about her ambivalence or capacity, but instead chalked it up to her process in deciding on a date. There's a difference between deciding on Wednesday or Thursday and changing your mind about wanting to die or not to die. And this woman was changing her mind. She wasn't deciding on Wednesday or Thursday.
Yeah.
She didn't suggest a date. She wanted to put it off forever until she decided again.
Right. The lack of training and adequate assessment tools can lead to inconsistent results. Dr. Lee cites the same Dutch study, which found disagreements about 12% of capacity evaluations, although the review committee accepted the approved euthanasia requests. So there was disagreement, but the euthanasia went ahead anyway, and the review committee said, no problem.
There's never a problem.
No problem.
Never, ever.
Nothing to
you
see
kill
here.
The people. You never heard about it after.
Right. Nothing to see here. An earlier study, which we talked about in February of 2016, showed physicians disagreeing about capacity assessments in 24% of euthanasia cases.
1/4. Wow.
Yeah. But the people were euthanized anyway.
Anyway, go. Kill.
Yeah.
In 11% of cases, no psychiatric evaluations were done. So it was just the doctor making their evaluation.
And that's 1 out of 10.
Yeah. Dr. Lee notes that people deemed ineligible for euthanasia are free to continue seeking an indefinite number of eligibility assessments until they eventually find assessors who will find them eligible. This is also known as doctor shopping. We heard about that before. Dr. Lee cites a 2017 study which found that physicians from euthanasia advocacy organizations account for over 50% of the cases in which due care requirements were not met, as compared to their involvement in only 5% of all euthanasia cases in the Netherlands. And I just want to note that all these studies that she's citing were led by a guy named Scott Kim, Dr. Scott Kim, from the National Institutes for Health in the United States. And the Judge Baudouin in the Truchon case basically said that he wasn't qualified because he didn't provide maid and he doesn't know the Canadian situation.
Who was this judge to say that this guy is not competent?
Well, the same thing happened in the first Carter case.
Yeah.
The judge said that Herbert Hendon, who is one of the originators of suicide prevention, period, was not qualified to speak on suicide prevention.
Yeah. If you are against, you are not qualified. Okay.
Right. I mean, basically that was
Well, that seems, from her worldview, that seems like an easy distinction to make. His his business is suicide prevention, not this new MAID thing that's not suicide at all.
Right. Dr. Lee says that while psychiatrists, quote, can provide an opinion on whether a psychiatric disorder is impairing a patient's judgment, unquote, giving over the responsibility for making the capacity assessment to a psychiatrist, quote, is neither a technically correct nor a rigorous quality practice, unquote. Dr. Lee concludes that there are no experts because the field of assisted suicide and euthanasia is relatively new. Quelle surprise. Dr. Lee believes that the wish to die to end intolerable suffering and the wish to die caused by a mental disorder are both forms of suicidal ideation. And it is not always possible to tell them apart.
And this is a doctor who is a very big player in this game, and this doctor administered MAID.
Right.
So he's fully competent and a big shoe.
Right. And, basically she disagrees with Judge Baudouin's statement that euthanasia and that medical aid in dying is not the same as suicide. Another factor that is largely unknown to practitioners looking at capacity to choose MAID is demoralization. Feelings of hopelessness, helplessness, a sense of failure, and the inability to cope, which are strongly associated with the passive wish to hasten death and requests for MAID. The psychological suffering of demoralization is being overlooked in MAID evaluations. Demoralized people cannot be forced to accept interventions for their condition and may still meet capacity requirements for MAID. Dr. Lee cites the cases of two women with demoralization who requested MAID, who saw their conditions improve when given ketamine as an antidepressant in a clinical trial.
Ketamine is a very nice medication.
Well, it's a hallucinogen.
Yes, but most pain medicine are hallucinogen if you take it take it the wrong way.
Right, not according to directions.
Yes.
But ketamine is both a pain medication and an antidepressant. And it has, as an antidepressant, it's unique in that it has an immediate effect, like within a half hour. Most antidepressants, you have to take them for weeks before you notice any difference.
More than 2 weeks most of the time.
Yeah, and ketamine, people notice the difference within a half an hour, and it lasts. There have been studies that have found that one dose of ketamine can last 6 months. So
why the government could not accept this
because it's a street drug.
Yeah, but
I know.
Many things like that are street drugs. This is just the way you administrate it. If doctors do their job and follow their patient, there's no trouble at all.
Right. Okay. So, clinical trial. The doctors assessing their applications were not sure whether they would be eligible due to depression. The first woman's desire to die increased as she accepted the inevitability of her death, while the second felt her quality of life improve, and so she withdrew her MAID request. Now, it's important to note that ketamine is still an experimental treatment. There have been more studies than just this one, but even if the positive outcome is reproduced on a larger scale, not everyone will accept or respond well to the treatment. So that's important to remember. We're not recommending ketamine, not recommending any particular drugs. Okay, next week we will look more closely at Dr. Lee's findings about assisted suicide and euthanasia for people with psychiatric conditions, as well as what she has to say about Julia Lamb herself. Okay. So the next topic is National Council on Disability affirms its opposition to assisted suicide. The National Council on Disability, a United States government agency that shapes and recommends disability policy at the national level, has released a third report on assisted suicide. The organization continues to oppose the practice. Their stance has not changed since the first report came out in 1997, and NCD reaffirmed its position in 2005. And
So it's 22 years.
22
now.
years, yes. Here are a few of some of the more important conclusions the council reached. 1, insurers have denied expensive life-sustaining medical treatments, but offered to subsidize lethal drugs, potentially prompting people to hasten their own deaths.
Oh, it's awful.
Right. So essentially, they reached the same conclusion, and they're just updating information, to that has happened since 2005. They're,
But basically what they say that it's cheapest to kill the people than to cure them.
and there have been instances where people have been offered assisted suicide rather than treatment for their cancer.
Which treatment existing?
Right,
No.
right. Available treatment.
Yeah, available.
So they applied for X treatment for their cancer. The health maintenance organization said, no, you can't get that, but we will give you assisted suicide pills. Disabled people have become demoralized due to internalized depression. Where have we heard that before? Such as being conditioned to regard help as undignified and burdensome, or to regard disability as an inherent impediment to quality of life. Discrimination and a lack of community-based supports can also cause demoralization. And medical and mental health professionals who lack knowledge and experience of disability don't recognize demoralization as a problem, but see it as an understandable reaction to having a disability. Better dead than disabled. Disabled people are more likely to face difficult financial, emotional, and social circumstances that make ending one's life seem attractive. Inaccurate diagnosis and prognoses of terminal conditions can lead people to end their lives out of fear.
And it happened more than you think.
Right. Where assisted suicide is legal, states have no means of investigating mistakes and abuse. And that's essentially the same thing that's happened in Canada with the Alan Nichols situation. His family wants an investigation into how come he was determined eligible when he probably wasn't competent. Standards are loosening in various aspects of assisted suicide laws. The scope of eligibility is increasing. More professionals can prescribe lethal substances, and waiting periods between acceptance of an assisted suicide application and carrying out the act have decreased.
Everywhere in the world. Why?
But this is in the United States.
Yeah, but it happened everywhere in the world.
Right. But this is limited to the United States. They're focusing on the US because that's their, territory.
Yeah.
And they have proof of those things. So all of this that they're saying has happened in the US. As a result of the societal panic over opioids, it may become easier to obtain a prescription to die than one to relieve pain. And that's a huge problem. That's not right. Many national disability rights organizations oppose the legalization of assisted suicide. All national groups that have taken a position are opposed. And this goes to what Judge Baudouin quoted in her decision, where she quoted Tom Shakespeare, who shouldn't have been in that courtroom, when he said that there's a difference of opinion. Now, yes, individuals with disabilities. There are lots of people who have their own opinion and support assisted suicide. But it's important to listen to the disability rights activists who work to support, what the rights of disabled people, and have analyzed this
Since 35
policy.
years?
Yeah.
Plus or minus?
Yeah, since 1983, since the Bouvier case.
Yeah.
And have, done our homework, and we have arrived at conclusions that are based on facts and not just emotions. And that's what the disability rights organizations believe. So yes, individuals want assisted suicide because of their feelings and being discriminated against and being locked in institutions and that kind of thing. But the disability rights organizations oppose. NCD made many recommendations. Congress should amend the Social Security Act to remove Medicaid's statutory bias for institutional long-term care rather than long-term care services and support provided to people living in the community. And the same thing needs to happen here. Sean Taggart's family would probably agree.
Yeah.
Medical professionals and healthcare facilities, including labs and therapy centers, must offer a full range of accommodations in compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. So there are two major federal laws that require accessibility in healthcare facilities, and yet there is still lack of access. All state agencies that deal with suicide prevention should address the specific challenges of people with disabilities and people with chronic conditions, including people with a terminal prognosis. State agencies that deal with suicide prevention should appropriate funding for research on disability-related risk factors in suicide prevention, as well as research on gathering data directly from people who request assisted suicide and euthanasia. So back to our point that we often say, where are the suicide prevention groups?
Yeah, we say that since many years now. What they are doing, you know why? Grandpa, father receive aid, and the grandson sometime choose to suicide himself because he copied grandpa. Okay, that's what happened a lot of time.
Right.
Copying.
Right. Disabled people should always be informed of the full array of clinical treatment options available, and they should get access to those options, as well as palliative care, personal assistance services, counseling, skilled nursing, and other supports. Training programs for healthcare professionals should require courses on skills and competencies needed to provide quality healthcare to patients with disabilities, and should develop a core set of disability competencies. In other words, doctors should be trained to get rid of their crappy attitude about disability.
Yeah. That's a minimum.
Yeah. Okay. It is vitally important that with the growing clamor to broaden eligibility for assisted suicide and euthanasia, the voices of disability rights activists be heard on this issue. While everyone has the right to their individual opinion and behavior, government policy and action must be led by a thorough and complete understanding of this issue, which the disability rights movement has cultivated for the past 35 years. The NCD report is well-timed to reinforce the disability rights arguments against expansion of hastened death. It's frustrating that 22 years after the first NCD report, the voice of disability rights movement remains a lonely cry in the wilderness.
Nothing has changed, and it is even worsened.
Yeah. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Taylor.
I was very impressed by this report. It's one neat little package containing a lot of the arguments and evidence that we use. If someone was just learning about the connection between disability and assisted suicide, I'd recommend it to them as a great starting point. But helpful information isn't worth much if nobody's going to listen to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm.
And that's very frustrating. And you know, that's a little bit the problem is, you know, because of how disability is perceived in our society, disability is associated with incompetence. And so disabled people are not consulted on policies that affect us. That's why we have the saying, nothing about us without us.
Right.
But nevertheless, you know, that's how governments work, and it's not appropriate. Okay. If you want more information about the topics that we discuss here, you can visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/toujours vivant, not dead yet, all one word. Visit our website at tvndy.ca. You can email us at info@tv-ndy.ca, or you can follow us on Twitter @TVNDY. Thanks to Christian for
Thank
helping
you,
us.
Amy.
And thanks to Taylor as
Thank
well.
you, Taylor.
Thank you for being there, and we will see you next time.
Bye.